welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. I'm Brother Gregory, and we're going to talk about the Kingdom of God. And a lot of things have been going through my mind this morning. A lot of things have been going through my life in the last few days. So I ponder what I'm going to talk about, but I don't really have an exact plan of what I'm going to talk about each day. But we're going to run around a lot of different ideas, but we're going to try to get a little bit into those mysteries of the kingdom and how they all work and how they all work together. And, I put up an article this week that is probably going to be controversial, which kind of goes without saying. And I put it in the context of a page that I already had up that was based on appetite. I didn't send out a notice before on the network of what we're going to talk about, but this idea of appetite, which we see it show up in many different ways in the Bible, and many different words that you can use to create this idea of appetite or connect it to the idea of appetite. Biting one another. Well, obviously you do not bite one another unless you have an appetite to bite one another. And so what is that? That's a metaphor of biting one another. Be careful you do not bite one another lest ye be devoured. And actually this takes us all the way back to the concepts of Cain in the early Genesis of the Bible, where they're talking about Cain and Abel. And what is really the message of Cain and Abel? I mean, obviously we've got a picture of Cain going up and hitting Abel with a club and killing them, and so we have this scenario, this story in Hebrew. When you actually look at the Hebrew words of this story, I find an awful lot of extra letters in some of the words that we see in the text, and as to what the Bible is trying to impart to you. If you just go read, it says, "And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? And why is thou countenance fallen?" And supposedly this has something to do with the fact that when he took sacrifices to the altar and burned them up, that the smoke went down. It didn't go up. Now, is that actually what's taking place, or is this a metaphor, an allegory, a story that's trying to tell us something about the way in which Cain operates and the results of that, the fruit of what Cain is doing, and how that is producing a particular result based on some variable in the equation that seems to be resting with Cain. And the difference between Cain and Abel was a tender of flocks, while Cain was a plower of Adama. And Adama is what man is made out of. And so we have these images of Cain and Abel as if they're the only two people, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel are the only two people on the earth. And people ask, well, who did they marry, and where did all these other people come from, and all this kind of stuff. We have a very sketchy view of what was going on. Yet we know that something happened where God breathed something into the life of Adam and Eve that was not breathed into anybody else, if anybody else existed on the face of the planet. They are told to go out and replenish the earth as if it had been plenished and it needed to be replenished. The Hebrew word is very clearly replenish the earth. So was man around for a long time before, and then there was some sort of disaster that is not necessarily directly mentioned in that particular context, and God needed to form something extra out of the living creatures that were already here that God had created. That's why there's two stories of creation. They're not really contradictory, but they're trying to impart different ideas about some of the basics of creation. And just like Jesus, when he comes out of the tomb, he breathes on the apostles and says, receive the Holy Spirit. Did God breathe into this Adam and Eve and make them special, something more than those who had not been breathed into? And was Abel a shepherd of men and women, also created by God, but not breathed into like Adam and Eve? And that Cain was plowing the Adama, the same people, regulating them, organizing them, being this overseer of that household, because Cain and Abel had the same breath in them, there's something extra in them that God gave them to dress and keep the earth. There's a reference to creating all the animals of the earth and then giving dominion to Adam and Eve, and they have dominion over these animals, and they go out and name these animals. But there's also the living creatures, which is part of a translation in the Hebrew. And when you read Hebrew, Hebrew is a fascinating language because every letter has a meaning, and those meanings are gathered together and create a bigger meaning, a more complex idea, because you take this symbol, and this symbol, which have meanings, and you put them together. And when I first began to study Hebrew, they talked about, most of these words being 3 letters long. Well, the reality is that when you actually go and read the Hebrew text, you don't see the 3-letter word there. You see 4-letter, 5-letter, 6-letter, 7-letter word there, because they add extra letters to add different nuances to the meaning. The order in which the letters appear affect that. So when you're actually reading Hebrew from the standpoint of the symbolism of each of the letters and the overall idea of the letter, you see how the words blend together. And we have pamphlets up that give you a little hint. It's a different way of thinking about words. You don't just assign a definition to a word like you do in Greek, and then, or English. You look up a word in English, and it can have 5, 10, 15 different definitions for the same word. Some of those definitions for the same spelled word are completely different, seem to have no relative entrance or connection to any other definition. Well, this sometimes appears to be the case when you're reading the Hebrew, if you're looking up the definition in Strong's Concordance. But when you're actually looking at the letters, another image begins to appear, because you have additional factors that you're looking at, different elements that you're looking at in the word. Well, there's another factor that goes unseen when reading language or hearing words or hearing people talk, and that is a spiritual factor, and that's not on the printed page. That's not in the written word. That is something else. That's that breath of God that exists outside of your physical experience. It's not a visible thing. You can't write it down on a piece of paper. You can't even impart it to people with the words of your mouth. It is on another plane of existence entirely. And it is actually the creative force of understanding. So, that being said, we're going to look at a couple of words like expectation. And, if you look at that Genesis 4:7, if thou dost well, shalt thou not be accepted? Accepted as what? Received as what? What do they mean, accepted? Accepted by God? Is that what he's trying to say? I mean, the word that we see there as accepted is also translated rising, dignity, excellency, accepted, highness, raised up. Will you not be, is defined as elevation. Will you not be elevated, raised up? So, if thou doest well, he says, that word there, doest well, that's it's translated well most of the time, good also diligently, also better, also accepted. That's another word that's translated accepted. But it's talking, if thou doest well. And Christ said, not those who say, but those who do. Doing has always been a very important part of God's plan. Right away, I trick people a lot of times with the question, what was God's first commandment? And his first commandment was to dress it and keep it. He gave us this planet, this dominion over certain things on this planet. What he didn't give us is dominion over one another. But he gave us dominion over creation. And he gave us something to do. Dress it and keep it, maintain it. And maintain it as, keep that dominion. We don't want to become despisers of dominion. And we have an article up on that because it actually says in the Bible, when you translate it, it says, woe unto those who despise government. But it's actually saying despise dominion. And that, of course, is what Esau got into trouble with. He despised dominion. That, of course, is what the Nicolaitans got into trouble for. That is what Balaam got into trouble for, that they preferred the wages of unrighteousness as opposed to this responsibility of dominion. They gave up their rights. They sold their birthright in exchange for benefits, something, often free from others. And that's despising dominion. But when God is talking to Cain, he says, if thou doest well, will thou not be accepted, elevated? If thou doest not well, which is a very similar word there in the negative, then it says, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. That word rule over, that's not the regular word for rule over. There's other words. It said that the primary word there is composed of the three-letter word mem, shem, lamad. Another word for rule is shem, resh, or shem, resh. But the reality is this is mem, shem, lamad. It's a different word. It doesn't mean rule. It's sometimes translated dominion. It's I was trying to think of some of the other words that it was translated into. Ruler, reign, dominion, govern, ruled over, power, indeed. It's actually translated indeed once. But the reality is it doesn't really mean rule like in rule over or even govern. It's translated that way, but that isn't really what the word means. And if you go to the actual Hebrew text, you'll see a completely different word. Well, I wouldn't say completely different, but it's tav, mem, shem, resh. And tav is the letter for faith. So it's a different kind of, and even the word rule over which is Biat Vav, which is really a part of that same word, because it's telling you what Biat has to do with house. And anyway, so you're missing these concepts. These translators have translated these words in order to create a story, an allegory, that fits their theology, their eschatology. And even the word desire there, it's not the normal three-letter word that you might see there. It also begins with the letter Tav and Shem and Vav and Kuf and Tav again and Vav. So, I mean, it's a lot of letters, a lot of ideas. But unto its desire you must rule over. That's actually what the literal translation of the words there. But again, like I say, the word rule includes faith. Because faith comes into you. And somebody sent me something on Facebook this morning, and it's a picture of where they drop these little balls down to, they're all mixed, different colors, and they drop them down, and there's all these little prisms down there. And supposedly it sorts them out according to color. Now, I don't know if that's true. I was going to actually look up, find out if that another one of these internet, you saw it on Google, so it must be true kind of thing. If that is true, that's an amazing idea. But the reality is I see something similar manifested in the Spirit, that if you make certain choices and act in certain ways, in other words, take those choices and put them into action, it will create a different result down at the end in your life. And, you know, and they put this in this allegory of a shepherd and a vegetable and fruit farmer, and they what they are doing, whatever they're doing, whether they're shepherds of people or whether they're plowers of people, regulators of people, this is determining whether the smoke goes up and smoke goes down. And God is actually saying, but if you do well, whatever that means, again, you go back to that word do well. Guess what letter that word begins with in this sentence? Tav, the letter of faith again. Tav, Yod, Tet, Yod, Biat. Biat, again, is household. So you've got two Yods around a Tet, beginning in a word that begins with Tav, the faith word, at the end, the house word, the household word. So when they say do well, they're not just saying do well. They're adding a lot to the word there that you're seeing in the Hebrew that you do not see in the translation. And when you tell a story that way to somebody and you write it down, because Hebrew was meant to be written, not spoken, but when you write it down, the original readers of that story are seeing these extra letters. So they're literally seeing the word in the context of additional letters. So they're talking about doing well with this Tav, Yod, Tet, Yod, Biat. And that means acting according to this faith, acting according to faith in what? Faith in God. Faith is a gift from God that compels our actions, requires that we do things in a certain way. Evil, who wants dominion of this planet, they don't want you to be a doer of the word. They don't want you to be diligent. They don't want you to strive. They want you to think, oh, you're saved because you thought the right thought. You thought the right thought about God, so therefore you're saved. They don't want you to be a doer of the word. Christ wanted you to be a doer of the word. All the apostles were doers of the word. Early Christians were doers of the word. But most modern Christians haven't even got a clue what real Christians were doing. what spirit they were walking with, what way they were going in. When Paul is writing Christians, they're taking care of all the social welfare of their society. The Christians in Corinth were starting to learn how to do this, and it had certain economic difficulties it created in Corinth. But Paul wasn't just talking to the people, he was actually talking to the treasurer of Corinth and telling them, you guys should be doing this not by force, but by free will offerings. Doing what? Collecting taxes by free will offerings. You should go that way. In Corinth, there was a dispute, of course. There was going to be a backlash, a resentment of that idea. But they were actually high-up people in the Corinthian government were thinking, yeah, we used to do this. Back in the days of the Peloponnesian Wars, that's the way the city-states were organized. They understood their history a little bit. But there was a different way of thinking, a different spirit that was moving in a lot of people throughout the Roman Empire. Some parts of the Roman Empire were beginning to see that they should not have gone this particular way of socialism, of free bread and circuses provided by men who exercise authority. They were beginning to see that because of their own history, their own past, and because they were at different levels of understanding. I see the world today going in this other way. The little balls coming down are being bounced over in this other way, and they've been sorted out in a different way. And the reason why is there's inside them, inside the people themselves, there's a different spiritual frequency, a different acceptance of truth. And so they're moved automatically over in this other direction. And that's what was happening with Cain. When we see the story of Cain, we all know that hitting your brother on the top of the head with a big club and killing him is a bad thing. But they're expressing a particular principle of action and thought and doing well and not doing well. And that can produce very subtle changes in society. And it has. Because today the modern Christian thinks it's absolutely okay to, if they know it's not okay to go to their brother's house and hit him on the head and kill him. They know that's bad. But they are, in the beginning, some translations when they talk about Satan being subtle, and of course he was subtle, most Christians don't know it's okay. It's against God's law to send somebody to your neighbor's house and force them to contribute to your welfare. They don't know that's not okay, and that's a sin, and that's what's happened here. And the sin we see in that text.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So let's step back a little bit into this quote about Cain. Cain was being told by God that if he does well, he will be accepted. If he does not do well, he, sin awaits him. And I point out that the word do well in this particular in this particular verse is tav, yad, tet, yad, bit. Bit having to do with the house, tav having to do with faith. I mean, literally, these words are almost like sentences. Yad is the divine spark, and we see two yads, and in between that, we see the tet. So what do all these letters mean? What is that word tet? What does that letter tet mean? It has to do with introversion. It talks about concealed power. Yeah, concealed power of good, but it is also representative of a twisted snake. We talk about you meant it unto evil, but God meant it unto good. So what are they talking about? God can actually turn evil into good. He can take what evil is darkness. It's the absence of good. He can take the absence of good and turn it into good. He can bring about good because of that. And that's really all evil is the absence of that good. But God is light. That's an actual positive force. And, evil is darkness. That's simply the absence of light. And so you destroy darkness with light. There was an interesting line. I see things all the time. I experience things all the time, and I happen to see, I guess it's one of the more recent, somebody loaned us a video of one of the recent Star Wars, and there was one line in there. It's probably the only one I can remember, if I can even remember it, and get it right anyway, is that when, everybody's, fighting the evil with their own anger and all this kind of stuff, and this person saves somebody, and they say that, we don't win because we defeat what we hate, but we win when we save what we love. And of course, they were sacrificing themselves. I guess they didn't die, but they were sacrificing themselves to save somebody else. And that's how you win against evil. You don't resist evil. You can't defeat darkness with more darkness. You can only defeat darkness with light. And so when you see these words and you see the addition of the letter Tav, which stands for faith, we're talking about this, and two yads, which represent the divine spark, and this tet in between, which is this hidden, this introversion, this concealed power of good. That's the good you don't see. I mean, you can see if somebody goes out and gives food to the homeless. Somebody contacted me this weekend, wanted to know about making yurts for the homeless, going to provide hundreds of yurts for the homeless. And the church could actually make those yurts and provide them. I mean, that would seem to be very poetic in the fact that maybe poetic isn't the word I'm looking for there, but Paul was a tent maker, except I don't have enough labor to do that, so I'll probably turn it over to some other commercial business, which my brother-in-law is in, or son-in-law is in. But the reality is you give them tents, and they still have the same spirit. It's Oglethorpe when he was trying to do something for the poor, who were locked up in poorhouses and locked up in debtors' prisons in England for failing to pay debt. He said, well, we should give them a new start in the new world. And so he was going to create a colony in Savannah. And he sent them, he financed this colony, and he financed sending these people over and getting an all-new start in the new world with a clean slate, and they could produce commodities and sell them back to England and make a new life for themselves. And he said, if I can get his quote right, he says, unfortunately, they were no more inclined to work in the new world than they were in the old. And now there's a lot of homeless that can be helped, but you have to have a certain spirit in the helping of them, or you're just another Sodom and Gomorrah, whether you're helping them with tax dollars or contributed dollars. You have to have this other spirit in you, this hidden power, and that comes through faith. Faith in what? Faith in your image of God, or faith in the God? And see, that's what it has now become acceptable, that your truth is just as acceptable as my truth. That's absurd. That's insane. There is a truth in the universe. There is a reality. There is a sidewalk below every tall building. If you jump off the building, you will collide eventually with the sidewalk. That is the nature of things. If you go down this path, you will confront what is down that path. If you jump in the water, you will get wet. I mean, it's just the way it works. That's the truth. You can't say, well, you won't get wet because you don't believe in water. You don't believe in the sidewalk. So if you jump off the building, you won't hit it. You will. Your truth means nothing. Your truth is delusion. And the person who's deluded is still going to hit the sidewalk. And probably at the same rate of speed. So the reality is that faith is a connection through the Yod, the divine spark, with God's mind, the mind of God. See, you have an image of reality, and I have an image of reality. But I have an opinion about reality. You have an opinion about reality. That's your truth, that's my truth. But God's opinion is reality. Whatever God is, His opinion of reality is reality. That is the truth. And faith is a connection to that reality, that understanding of the reality. And it is it is synonymized or symbolized with light. Because with light, you can see what's in the room. In darkness, you have to guess what's in the room. And that, you imagine there might be a chair here, there might be a chair over here. But if you enter the room with light, you see the chair. And so it takes us back to the Tet. The Tet is the hidden good. It's this spiritual realization through Tav and the Yod, the divine spark, which is your connection to the Tav through faith, to God. But if the Tav is at the end, that's your faith in your Tav, in your reality, which does not remove the sidewalk, does not remove the repercussions. So when God is talking to Cain, he's saying, if you do well, Tav, connected to the Tav and the Yod, then the hidden good, the Tet, will go into you through the Yod, and it will produce a particular result at the end. And Lamad, your hand, it will produce a certain kind of work and diligence. But if you're not connected to the Tav, but you have faith in your image of God, but not the God, then you're not going to end up with the same result. You're going to end up with what he calls sin. And he has this word for sin, which is Hey, Tet, Elas, Tav. The Tav is at the end. It's your vision of truth is at the end, not God's, yours. Elah is actually composed of two different words. It's a Yod and a Yod with a Vav. Vav is a division word, a Yod and a Yod. Those are divine sparks, but the second one is upside down. I always see, when I see the Elah, I always see that painting of Michelangelo where they show God reaching out with his finger and man reaching out with his finger, and they're almost touching, and they're divided. Man from God, divided. And that's the Yod and the Yod, divided. That's man. We're divided from God because of sin. And if we have faith in our faith, and this is what I see rising up. I mean, we call things like socialists and socialism, and the left is people divided from the truth, and they end up with a certain view of reality. And but the conservative is not necessarily connected to the truth either. They're in the dialectic. They're down there fighting with the left, but they are all left of righteousness. Because, see, most conservatives, although there are some you'll find amongst them, but many of your conservatives don't understand that it is sin to regulate your neighbor, to force your neighbor to provide for your welfare. That is sin. That is short of the light of God. That is not doing well. Now, amongst the conservatives, you'll find that they don't want their guns regulated. You know, they may not want their family regulated. They may not want to be taxed too much. But they still go and look for the benefits of men who exercise authority, one over the other. And if you go back to Cain, you know, on the website, I was actually trying to change this during the break, but the computer's running so slow. Not that it's incorrect, but what I have written there on the page on Cain is rulers like Nimrod and Saul may gain power in many ways, but always resort to the use of force, like Cain, to provide a welfare or a social network that snares the people. And there's live links into that quote. But I was actually going to change that a little bit, add a little bit more to it. Always they desired to regulate through force their neighbor, their people. And again, what was Cain doing? He was plowing the Adama. He's trying to regulate the Adama. And, of course, that's where I was going to take you today a little bit, and that's what I've done in the article on regulate and appetite. We have this appetite to regulate our neighbor, to control our neighbor. Now, obviously, you can see the extremes of that, but what you need to see is the subtlety of that, which takes us to another word that I wanted to explore today, is expectation. You can find the word expectation in the Bible a number of times, and I think the first time you see the word expectation is in Psalms 9:18. For the needy shall not always be forgotten. The expectations of the poor shall not perish forever. Well, the poor is not just poor people. It's the people who are poor, because they don't have true tav, true faith in the real God. And so they're poor. They may not be financially poor. They may be very financially rich, but they're still poor. But he talks about the expectation of the poor shall not perish forever. Well, I know a lot of very unhappy rich people. They're not poor, but they're very unhappy. And why are they yearning to know the truth, to do the right thing? The same as the actual physically poor people. Do they want to do the right thing? Do they want real faith? They want the faith of God. It's not faith in God, it's a faith of God. It's that connection with God through their divine spark, through their understanding, that God is writing upon their hearts and upon their minds. Well, the word expectation, we only see that about a dozen times in the Bible. And when you get down into Isaiah and Zechariah, it's actually a different word. It's a completely different Hebrew word. But you'll see it in Proverbs 62:5. My soul, wait thou only upon God, for my expectation is from him. And in Proverbs 10:28, the hope of the righteous shall be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked shall perish. Well, that word expectation, it's not always translated expectation, as usual. It's also translated hope. And and again, it often has a variety of additional letters to it. And so anyway, we'll look at all that eventually here, but I was going to go back to our original ideological possession concept, because here we're talking about Cain and Abel, and we have kind of an ideology through our eschatology and through our interpretation of these stories. We create a whole philosophy about life and about what we see being taught us in the Bible. And it may not all be correct. It may be confused because it's not the tet. It's not that hidden information about good. It's just words on a paper and a story. And I'm not trying to... You can still tell the story of Cain and Abel the way you always have. But there's a message behind that story. And I'm trying to broaden the possibilities of understanding what that story really is. Because Jesus says that if you lust after a woman, you've already committed adultery with her in her heart. And so if when Cain struck Abel with a club, according to the story, and killed him, and buried his body, hiding the reality of what he had done, which is what Adam and Eve did. They wanted to hide the reality of what they have done. It's that denial of our sin that keeps us in sin. But before he hit him on the head, he already wanted to regulate him. He wanted to regulate other people. He wanted to plow the ground. He is already murdering his brother in his heart. And so you have to, it's a change in the heart. It's a change of connecting your faith with God's, your way with God. God is a giver of life, despite a lot of the other translations where God is supposed to be vengeful and wanting to kill everybody. God didn't want to kill everybody. That's not what he wants to do. He wants life for everybody. But those who embrace the darkness, who run from the light, he's giving you choice. You're running to destruction. He tells you over and over again, warns you over and over again, the ways of the common purse run towards death and destruction and evil. He wants you to go to the light. You keep running into the dark. And you need to change your ways to go this other way. And so we've been talking about some of the characteristics that would give you idea of ideological possession. And it's like a quicksand once you're caught in it. And you have to become humble again. You're caught in this narcissistic quicksand of self-indulgence and self-satisfaction and wanting to believe you've already got it and you're already saved and you now go do what you want. But you're not really connected by faith to the divine spark with the real God. You have faith, but it's in your image of God. And that's why it upsets people to hear me talk about the fact that they may not really be receiving the wholeness. I mean, everybody has some truth, but do they have the whole truth? If you don't have the whole truth, you have a lie. And if you have faith in a lie, you have faith in the darkness that goes along with that lie. And you need the whole armor of God. You need the whole light frequency of God in order to be sorted out where you need to be sorted out. Because without the whole armor of God, the whole truth, you're going to be turned off course. And you're going to be fastened to that which is not of God. You'll be connected. You'll be snared. The Bible talks about being snared and trapped. Even the homosexual can't change the fact that he's a homosexual. He's given over to a natural lust. The real success and awakening that he needs is in another area of his existence he does not even want to look at. He is sealed in darkness, and not just him, greedy people, selfish people, angry people. You're bound, you're snared by these things. And you're snared by so many of those things, you've also gone into physical bondage in the world. And we showed the contractual nature of government and the covenants of the gods, and we show you, well, you've lost these rights because you've eaten this pottage, this red pottage, this Adama pottage. That's actually what they're talking about. The pottage is Adama. Adama is man, this pottage of man. You know, you take it back to what Soylent Green with Charlton Heston. It's people. We're eating people. Take it back to what I said at the beginning of the show. We're taking a bite out of one another, and now we've been devoured. All the same symbols are there. That you've been altered. Your thinking has been altered. Your vision has been altered. And now you want a clearer vision. You have to bring in the light, and you bring in the light, you have to see yourself. And I gave the example last week of the Hydra. which is this serpentine water monster in the Greek Roman mythology, but is also part of a genus of hydrozoa that swims around eating and living in the water, but then eventually becomes attached to one rock or another. It just attaches itself, and it no longer swims. It doesn't have to go anywhere, doesn't have to make any decisions, doesn't have to think anymore, because it's attached. It's connected. It's snared by its own choice of rocks. It's snared in this one place. It cannot move anymore. Well, it doesn't need to make any more decisions, so it eats its own brain. This is what happens to all socialists. They eat their own brain because they're attached to an ideology. And the reality is the conservative can do the same thing because they're attached to their ideology. They want to think they're right. And so they look at others and they say, well, look how wrong they are. And, all the socialists think at those conservatives, they have no heart. And the conservative looks at the socialists and says, oh, look at them, they have no brain. Well, the reality is they both are eating their own brains, and they are just eating one another.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.